All right, guys, David Villa here. Welcome to another episode of GC Talks. Today, you're in for a treat right here in this studio. I'm going to be interviewing Pastor Bobby Sasser. He is the Chief of Staff at Radiant Church in the Tampa Bay area. This is going to be a great topic that leaders, I promise you, you need to tune in and listen. This is going to be one you want to take notes on, and it's going to cause you to want to immediately hire somebody like him. All right? Stay tuned. All right, guys, you're in for a treat today on GC Talks. I have Pastor Bobby Sasser. I've been trying to get Bobby in the studio to interview here for a while, and super excited about this. He is the Chief of Staff of Radiant Church, Tampa, and this is spreading.
It's like Bay.
It's like Tampa Bay plus.
That's awesome.
And 11 campuses.
Yeah.
I've got a little insight. Monthly or bi-monthly, I'm in some meetings, as one of the trustees at Radiant, so I get some insight on that. But I want to talk to you, man, about really first of all, thank you for being here.
Hey, thank you. I'm honored to be here. You're a hero. One of our trustees, which we appreciate, and just the model that you live of, loving God, the family man, husband, father, grandfather. What's your grandfather's name, by the way?
My grandkids?
What is your name to your grandkids? Yeah.
Poppy.
So Poppy.
Poppi.
Yeah, there you go. And so it's you're just a model to follow. So I'm more honored to be here than ever. So
I'm looking forward to I think our listeners, I know that they're going to get a huge benefit from this because a lot of times we'll have leaders on, including our pastor, Pastor Aaron, who's always brought great content. But a lot of times we'll have a leader from one perspective on, and it's the guy out front, or it's the guy that has written the books and things like that. And that's a great perspective.
Yeah, for sure.
But being in leadership and being that person, I see the importance more than ever, man, of someone like you, and that thinks like you and operates like you, being really kind of the glue, I would say, that holds certain things together.
I appreciate that.
And absolutely. So I want to talk a little bit about that. Yeah. And I would call it, Chief of Staff, what a great name. I'm a political junkie, so that kind of just makes me think of the White House.
There you go.
But from the function standpoint, it's you're running multiple things. So how do you, first of all, how do you keep it all together? First of all, how does someone like you keep it together? Then I want to talk about the functions.
That's a great question. And obviously we're believers, we're a church, and so rooted in faith. And so it really goes back for me to calling. But I think there's some guys that maybe haven't even found full faith yet. Yeah. That God's kind of, we believe that God's the creator, right? And so even guys that maybe aren't quite in touch with that yet, there's still a calling that God's given us. And so for me personally, that's really the motivation. That's what keeps me going, keeps me aligned, is that I feel very called to it. Yeah. And so there's some really great things, some real high moments, but there's, just like you're in business, there's some days where it's a little bit more of a grind, and so it all balances out, right? But really going back to calling it, not to sound cliche.
No, well, I think that's super important, because I've learned that even before a position, or even was thought of, who would have thought, hey, I'm called to be a chief of staff. I don't know if anybody would have thought that. So even before a title or maybe a position's created, I think a lot of times we're called, to something that we're passionate about and we're good at, and that we already kind of do before it's even a thing, or labeled. Yeah. And I think that's kind of with you, because I watched positionally you move within the organization, the church, and kind of take different roles on. And it's almost one of the things I always appreciate about Radiant too, and because it is a church, but as a business leader, and someone who's in marketplace and have been around ministry, it's super valuable to watch. As things grow, it's like positionally somebody grows into, okay, well, I'm needed full time in this thing that I've been doing kind of part time.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to move me, positionally into this place.
Sure.
And Radiant does a really good job of that.
Yeah.
So I've watched you kind of operate in this role.
Yeah, and we would even say, it's a big heartbeat of ours culturally, right? Is that, the goal is more important than our role. And so the idea of like, hey, whatever I'm needed to move the ball forward, this is for a church, but we do view it as an organization, right? So I was full-time hire number 1.
Wow.
In year 2 of the church. We were only one site, and now we have well over 100 staff. 10 physical locations, soon to be hopefully 11. And so, it's been really cool to grow with that. And so my role I think the calling has always been the same, that I'm here to support and implement the vision.
Yeah.
But, my title or the day-to-day operations might have changed. But again, it goes back to the goal is more important than the role. Because sometimes it's easy to get caught up in that. And it's, unfortunately, the most unhealthy version of that, it's rooted in selfishness, right? Because it's a bigger picture than all of us, right?
Yeah, it's almost like it's not my job, it's not in my vocabulary,
Correct.
right? And so that's really cool. So actually, it's a perfect position for someone that started as employee number 2, number 1 behind the pastor, and then kind of growing into overseeing the staff. But so how important? So as a really also, I think the calling is not only to the role, but you're also, I think a lot of times in that position, you're a big picture guy, but you're also called to a person, like the heart of a leader.
100%. Yeah.
And so how important? How important? Maybe twofold. Is it when a leader recognizes maybe the need for this position, and then from your perspective, if you're somebody that really feels called to this second man kind of thing, is it to really see the heart of the person and the vision of the person you're serving?
Absolutely. Yeah, and my story specifically kind of goes back, Pastor Aaron is our lead pastor. He planted the church. Obviously, you've been a part of that for a long time. But before Radiant, we knew each other, and we were in youth ministry together in Pensacola.
Right.
And so it was the same kind of flow, just a lot different. It was a youth group of a couple hundred kids.
Yeah.
We were all volunteers.
It was like minor league.
Yeah, it was. But it was the same. It was the same flow. We're almost. It's funny. We're almost like the same guys. We're just doing the same thing in a different way.
Right.
So I would agree that there's a big calling to a person. And you see that, obviously the Bible is our foundation as believers. So you see that rooted throughout Scripture. You see that, honestly, even non-faith companies, you see that there's this dynamic of chemistry of a team of organizations that have done really well, that have lasted. And honestly, I don't know when it was. It's funny because I've always been content in knowing, like, I guess not content, but secure in what God had called me to do.
Right.
And so I was always trying to find, even Apple. I love Steve Jobs, but I'm digging into like, what were the guys on the team? There's a movie that came out a couple years ago that really kind of unpacked Ford versus Ferrari.
Yep.
And you're looking at the Ford. And so the guy behind the scenes was the guy that I always connected with.
Right.
And it wasn't like a diminishment of his leadership or their leadership for the ladies as well, but the idea that they knew their lane and they knew what their biggest value was. And I think that's where I began to find a lot of ownership of clarifying what I felt internally, if that makes sense.
100%. Yeah, and it makes huge. I mean, I love kind of under the hood. What's going on under the hood and what makes it tick? Because the reality is, and so I looking at business, because I know you have a background or you grew up around business.
My dad is he's kind of a blue collar guy, but has had big businesses, small business, a solopreneur to an entrepreneur, but really I've never known my dad to work for another man.
Right.
And so there was always this hunger that that's just what I saw modeled. Yeah. And genuinely I felt I love business. I mean, even walking around your company, like it motivates me. I just not to over spiritualize it, but had this deep calling to serve in the church. But I actually have really motivated by business. I love business. I love business leaders. I love the concept of bringing a product, designing, organizing a team around something to move the ball forward.
Well, I think coming into it, it makes sense anyway, because of I think that although we're bringing the gospel into the marketplace ministry, the church from an organizational standpoint, I think needed at one point to learn some structural things from business.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a great marriage there.
Yeah.
But I want to ask you something, because you mentioned, not even faith-based companies or faith-based organizations that it's common to see someone that follows the vision of a leader. But I think the difference is, I want to kind of ask you this: the importance of, especially with kingdom business owners and leaders, entrepreneurs, bootstrappers that are watching here, of really tying into what the Word of God says with regards to honoring a person and honoring that vision. Because sometimes I think the world where the disconnect can come is when there's the scriptural foundation to maybe back up the reason they're doing that. So that, things like greed can come in, and I was passed over can come in, or I was overlooked, or these different types of things that might come through traditional business. But as someone who's going, I'm in the secular world, I'm a believer, I'm running a business, but I want to run this thing right. I think that model is an incredible model to really structurally, build the marketplace in the ministry.
Yeah, for sure.
What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, for sure. And again, I think we're all called to something, right? So, you have some great team members that I would say called to you, right? Mm-hmm. And so God gives people unique callings. For the church world, maybe it's a church planner. Mm-hmm. For a business leader, maybe it's to be an entrepreneur, which is probably a lot less glamorous than people realize. There's a lot of hard work behind the scenes, a lot of faith, all of that. And so the way I say it, the way that I've kind of always verbalized it in my own mind is that God calls certain people to be the founder. Whether that's a company, whether that's a church, whether that's whatever it is, secular or sacred. Mm-hmm. And then God really calls everyone else to serve those people. And you see it throughout history. You see it throughout the Bible and just secular history, that there's this visionary, and I think it all comes down to vision. Mm-hmm. And not that other people that aren't the founders aren't visionaries, or the people that are the CEOs or whatever their title is. I think there's components that all of us might have of vision, but at the core level, I think that an organization needs one primary visionary.
Right.
And everyone kind of has to assimilate into that, knowing that their job is to support that vision.
Yeah.
And what I found for me personally is I was motivated. So I saw, for example, I'll if it's okay, I'll use my story specifically.
Sure.
Pastor Aaron is a very big visionary. You're a visionary. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that can be intimidating to people, because there's quick changes. I mean, even before we really started today, your book, your book here, you're like, hey, real quick before it was a total sideline thing. But for a guy in my shoes, I'm motivated by that, because and then it's like, man, that's what can be viewed as chaos to certain people. Yeah. What I call is beautiful chaos. Like we need chaos to move things forward.
Yeah, it's interesting. Just a sidebar here, because I want to ask you something too about team building.
Yeah.
Kind of segues into it. But somebody told me years ago, he might not be alive. He was an older pastor that was a mentor to me years and years ago. He told me, he said, you're a visionary. He said, visionaries, he said, they lived today, yesterday.
Correct.
And they're living tomorrow, today. But you have to be careful, because the people around you, to get things done and to not be paralyzed, need to understand that. So I used to, and when I heard that, it transformed something in front of me, because I would be in a meeting where I would do something like that, but in a boardroom, and I'd just throw out all types of ideas and vision and thought, and then people scramble around to write things down, and then would panic because they thought I meant to start them all now. Yeah. Like these need to be done now. Well, you're
just having ideas.
I was having ideas. Yeah. And so I needed to communicate that. So it's interesting you said that.
Well, and I think it goes both ways, right? And so I think, and that's where chemistry and trust come in.
Yep.
So for Pastor and I, and whoever is on your team that's doing this, our goal call it the second seat, right? Mm-hmm. Whatever that title might be. There's a myriad of titles that second guys have. But that they have to define. You can't expect the visionary to give clarity on anything. Yeah. Because their job is they're soaring at 30,000 feet. Mm-hmm. And so as the number two guy, or whatever that role is to take that vision and to filter it down. So there's a lot of times where I'll ask Pastor Aaron, like, hey, you said this? And he'll be like, oh no, I was just, I ate some cold pizza for breakfast, and honestly it wasn't even filling. Whereas other things are like, yes, that's a foundational shift that I want us to give a lot of attention to. So it's my job as the primary person on the team to filter and implement what vision is, and be able to kind of go, what are some ideas that maybe we'll put on the back burner versus what are some things that we actually feel are going to be a paradigm shift? You know, and you see that throughout leaders, and I think that's where the intuition of the visionary comes into play.
I think this is going to be one of the most helpful episodes we do. I really do, because this is not understood, and it's so important. I actually see like almost a collective sigh of relief from a lot of visionaries listening to this, going, whoa, that's what I'm missing.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to ask you something else, because I think that it comes down to really, and I struggled so hard. I mean, I've been in business for a long time. You know, having someone like you listening to this, being able to talk about these types of things, having podcasts readily available is a godsend. Even our church, you know, for instance, and other churches, teaching on business principles, things of this leadership principles is huge. But when I came up, you know, I mean, I learned this through failure. I mean, I just learned it through literally making mistakes, the school of hard knocks. And I remember, you know, building a business and then growing and not knowing who to hire first. So I started hiring people like me, you know, because that was, but they're like me, maybe that's what we need.
Yeah.
And it's almost like, you know, the Lord showed me, and then failure showed me, failure showed me first, and then the Lord kind of said, hey, you know, I was behind this a little bit. And it was almost like the boat was lopsided.
For sure.
You know, it was just, you know, and so it's really difficult, I think, to understand how to build a leadership team.
Correct.
And who you need on it. You know, like you need nurturers, you need that person that's going to be that person that's going to, call them a bean counter, or somebody that's going to get it done.
For sure.
So what's your thoughts on that? Because that's one of your roles, right? To make sure that we add this thing balanced.
And really, I think it goes back to I've really, the Lord's given me a heart for leadership, and again, that's secular leadership. I've studied all the things from a high level, and I've really come down to the idea of frameworks, right? And not in a way that is a straitjacket for the visionary, because that can be tough. Which I would love to, without getting too weeded, go into that in a moment.
Sure.
But there's two primary resources that I've come out. There's a lot of resources, but two kind of main frameworks. Okay. One is called the traction model, which you might be familiar with, and it's all about designing the way that you would design an organization. It really speaks to the way that you build the leadership team, what an effective leadership meeting looks like, and it gets really granular. It's actually really good. The other one is predictable success. Which talks about the life cycle of an organization, and you kind of start, which you're a founder, you get it. You're just trying to pull it all together. It's what they actually refer to as white water, where you're just like making it. The middle is predictable success, and then it kind of goes on the back side, and you look at companies like Blockbuster and Kodak, where they didn't have a paradigm shift, even though they saw changes in the market, but they weren't able to adapt. And so now they cease to exist. And so there's this idea that, one, I think leadership teams have to, be flexible and adapt while also having a longevity mindset. So if I can, just two quick things. One is, I think understanding the visionary is key. And I think that God, through relationships, you can really find the right person as a visionary that complements you. Because I agree with you, it's actually really easy, and you see that a lot. Like in our context of church, anytime a guy has too many ideas, which we love, we celebrate that. But it's like, you know what? We're actually going to be the first check to your church plant. Because you're going to have a hard time fitting here. Because that's not what we're looking for. We have one visionary. What we would say is we have a captain of a ship and we're all crew members. We don't have multiple captains because it gets convoluted. And you can probably 100%. Easily see that in business. On the flip side of that, and this is what I see a lot of guys, both in business, I'm connected, through what you guys do with the business leaders. So love all of our business leaders, and I like getting down into the granular pieces of their business. Is that when visionaries go too far on the operations side of a guy, that there's too much of a disconnect. And the conversations that ops guy's bringing up, you're like, dude, I'm sorry, you lost me. My mind was. So there's this very big balance in what I would consider my role is a buffer. Because we actually need deep operational guys for the sake of scale.
Absolutely.
Or else it's a hodgepodge and it has a life, and then it eventually begins to fizzle out, and then it can be a little chaotic. So there's this buffer zone where I'm hybrid enough to understand the visionary's mind and the operations mind, and I'm not really great at either. I'm good enough to be able to speak the language of both.
Sure.
But
it's like a conduit.
It really is.
It's like it's like I'm plugging to this side, I'm plugging on this side,
Yes.
I'm connecting the dots.
Because even for us, some of our super strong, what I would call, what predictable success calls process guys, and you probably know this from organization. You got
the ones we avoid as visionaries.
Yeah. You got visionaries. What their language, for the sake of language today, they would say visionaries and processors, and in the middle is operators. And operators is like, man, that's the guy that I know I can fire off a text message, I can call out of the blue, and he'll kick the door down for me.
Right.
That's really at the end of the day what I felt like works. Because if you need all three, it's just the chemistry of how those things operate together.
I think it's huge because I think that as much as there's books on it and processes that have been written out, there's some folks that are talking about it more. There's just a ton of people that don't understand how to, that haven't really understood how to make that happen. And I think it's caused probably a lot of bad hires, and it can cause for me it caused me a huge setback, because anytime you have a bad hire or the wrong hire, then there's time, there's resources, you're going a direction, you're taking X amount of time to go into the direction that you got to come back to and kind of in essence start over, and it's huge setbacks. You mentioned talking about something, you wanted to bring it up a second ago. Was it Whitewater? Or what?
Yeah, well, that book, Predictable Success, kind of goes through the life cycle. Whitewater is kind of, imagine a little bit more on the earlier stages of a company or an organization where things are growing, it's crazy. You're just trying to, that's where someone's onboarding and you don't even have anything for them. You're just keeping up, right? And then the next stage is, and that's where that operations guy is key, but what they've studied is that if you allow and you know what I'm talking about when I say whatever their titles might be in any given company, but very process-driven people. Bean counters is a way that you said it earlier. When they begin to take over, what happens is the visionary no longer even wants to be at the company that they founded, because it's not fun. And so you've got to let process stay in their lane so that vision is still the one driving whatever the goal is, whether it's the company like you lead, whether it's a church, whether it's a service company in the blue collar space, whatever it is. Like, visionaries have to continue to keep their pulse on the company, because they're actually what drives the thing forward. And everything else is just there to support. You can't allow process or operations to take precedent, because they'll naturally want to organize everything.
Sure.
So
absolutely, that's awesome. And so how important do you think, when it comes down to growing, how important is it for a founder, a visionary, to really find someone that thinks like you do, that that kind of operates in that way? Like, at what stage, or is it often needed right away? What do you think?
I think it's necessary for scale. I think it's necessary for growth. Like I mentioned, my dad, those conversations I had with him as a teenager, like, why don't you bring in a team? And he had his own vision of what he wanted, and he didn't want to get into a big bureaucracy and all that stuff. But I do think it's helpful, because it's hard. The visionary on their own, the way that I would view it is like the illustration of the trellis and the vine. The rose bush needs something to grow on, or else it's going to go wild. And that's what happens with a lot of heavy visionary founders, is that they have all the vision, they run really fast, but without the support system of that trellis, they're going to phase out. And you see that. You see companies that do that. There's so many good ideas, so many great product development pieces, all of that, but without the right pieces behind them to implement think of the railroad. It's like, they need some tracks to run on. But I think it's very much contingent on chemistry. Chemistry's huge. Trust is big. And I think finding someone who has the capacity to be a leader, a founder, but doesn't have the calling, or doesn't necessarily, like you even mentioned some of the greed and why am I not doing this? They have to know their space. And that's where I am. I'm super confident in what I feel called to, knowing that a lot of guys in my shoes would easily, in our space, would be to be a church planter or to be a senior pastor. For companies, it might be to be the CEO or to be the founder. Is that they're confident in who they are, they're secure in who they are, but that they know their role. And in my role, it's to mine out. Like, so for me and my leader, which is Pastor Aaron, it's my job to go in there and not to expect anything.
Yep.
Like if he's having to tell me how to do my job, then it's a problem. You know, my dad was like that. My dad would be like, man, if I have to tell you what to do, then why are you here?
Right.
So I kind of had a little bit, maybe my dad, now that I'm processing it, was helpful. Because I go in and I'm like, okay, I'm here to mine out the vision that this person has. I'm here to ask questions. I'm here to not get into the weeds. And I think that's the key, but to stay high level so that I can take vision and build that trellis that's going to take us to the next level.
So if you're watching, you know, I know with me, man, my mind's just going a million miles an hour. We have some great people, but you know, if you're a visionary, you're watching this, I personally think that many of you are sitting there going, okay, this is what I need. And the importance, and if you're a person that, you know, operates in the giftings that Pastor Bobby operates in, you know, maybe this is what I'm called to do. And I think that putting the two together is recipe for growth. And you know, really quick before we go, I appreciate you being with me.
Love it.
You know, I mean, I think this is going to get great feedback. But you know, it's biblical. I mean, I'm thinking of this when you're talking. I'm thinking Habakkuk too. You know, the vision passage. But you know, it's interesting. We almost act like it's talking to visionaries, but the more I'm thinking about it, it could be talking to a leadership team. It's like, you know, write the vision, make it plain. So that those who see it, you know, will pick it up and run with it. And so I'm thinking of the visionary casting the vision, then somebody, you know, listen, some visionaries don't like to write a lot of things down and take that time, but it didn't say, hey, you visionary, write it down. It says write the vision, make it plain so that those who see it. It's almost a picture of the whole deal. I love the Message version of it. It's my favorite interpretations of that passage. It says to write the vision, make it plain on big block letters. So that people can read it on the run. So to me, it's like, you know, hey, I'm thinking of a billboard. I'm driving down the interstate, you know, 75 mile an hour. I look over, I see it. I'm moving and I see it. It's constantly in front of me. So I just see that as a perfect picture. You know, visionary has the vision. Someone writes it down. They write it down in a form where they make it plain so that everybody can see it, pick it up, and do their part.
Absolutely, and I think the team is critical. You know, I think everything. I'm a big team guy, and so love the idea of team. If you look at anything that's winning, from a sports team to a company to a church to anything, it's a part of our society. There's a team behind it.
Absolutely.
And I think for the team to know that they have a spot. And for the guys that struggle with that, this is what I would love to, if we're closing out with, is that if you're on a team and you are that person that's like, oh man, I need to be the blank. I need to be the CEO. I need to be the leader. I need to be the visionary. Whatever word comes to mind when you think of being the one in charge or whatever. It's like, I tell guys all the time, you know, I would much rather be holding an oar on a boat of a winning team than to be the captain of a sinking ship.
Oh man,
and it's a whole thing. And what it is it's rooted in people there. And I think the world we live in with social media, that there's this comparison, and there's guys living outside of what they were meant to live outside of. And they're alone in a company that's failing, in a church that's failing, because they wanted to be the number one when God called them to be on a winning team as a number two.
That's good. I don't know what we're titled this, but you know what, we'll get creative on it. But how important is this conversation, man? Bobby, Pastor Bobby, I appreciate you hanging out with me.
I loved hanging out.
I'm gonna watch this back, and I'm gonna do some more research. You got my wheels turning, so I appreciate you, man.
Hey,
Thank you
love
so
you,
much.
man. Appreciate it, dude. Excited.
All right. Thank you. All right, I told you the episode was fire. I don't know about you, but I've already gone to Indeed, and I've already put an ad out for Chief of Staff. I'm sure you're going to do the same thing. Hey, what an amazing, amazing episode. I want to thank Bobby Sasser for joining us today. I'll see you next time on GC5.